Good morning, everybody. Once again, it is Tuesday, and we are having another moment of hope with Upward Transitions. This week, I am joined by Greg Beben. Did I say that right, Greg?
Oh, it's actually Beben.
Beben. Thank you for correcting me. I have a name that is often mispronounced as well, so I always want to get it right. Thank you for correcting me. Greg Beben from Legal Aid Services, and I just wanted to have a conversation with Greg about the moratoriums that have recently been lifted. So, Greg, how long have you been with Legal Aid?
I've been with Legal Aid for a little over 10 years now, actually. I started in our Lawton office, and I did a wide variety of cases in southwestern Oklahoma over a number of counties there for a few years. And then I came up to Oklahoma City, and since I've been in Oklahoma City, I primarily work with people experiencing homelessness, and then I also do a lot of general housing cases, a lot of evictions, some foreclosures here and there too. But you know, when you're working with people experiencing homelessness, they have a lot of different legal issues. Everybody has their own different story, and I've done some unique cases sort of that too. But right now, we're like everybody, we're diverting resources to different areas in response to what's going on. And right now we're putting a lot of resources into fighting evictions, and that's what I've been focusing on for the last few months.
We are too, and you are our partner in that work. And so that's why I wanted to pick your brain this morning on behalf of Legal Aid Services. And you guys will notice that there is a comment section. So if you have a question or a comment or something, you can leave it there. And if we can't get to it during our conversation today, we'll try to point you to some resources. We always want to remind you that 211 is a wonderful resource for any of those questions that you may have. We're not going to answer all your questions today. We wouldn't even try. But if you have a question or a situation that you're dealing with, 211 is always a great resource to have in our community. And so be sure to have that number. You can call them and they will point you to a resource. So Greg, now that the federal moratorium has ended, what do we need to know?
Well, so a couple of different things. So the federal moratorium, ended July 25th, but those cases that were covered by the CARES Act, and let's get into details too. So the CARES Act identified certain types of properties that were touched by federal funding. The most easily identifiable, of course, are public housing or other properties touched by subsidized housing, say if they accept a voucher, low-income housing tax credits. Those are easily identifiable properties that everybody can quickly identify on their own. It's public information that they are CARES Act covered. Then there are also properties where if there's a mortgage on the property and that mortgage has been touched by some federal agency, typically Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, and sometimes the actual landlords aren't aware of that themselves, because sometimes mortgages get transferred without knowledge of the property owner. And then there are websites where you can check to see if those properties are covered under Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, which then would make it covered under the CARES Act. So for those properties that are covered under the CARES Act, the moratorium only stopped evictions for non-payment of rent. It didn't stop rent from accruing. It put on pause the evictions for non-payment of rent. So what happens now is, one, the landlord can now and can always have evicted you for other reasons. But two, if they are going for non-payment of rent, they have to, even though the moratorium's over, they still have to give you a 30-day notice, which typically in Oklahoma, when somebody's being evicted for non-payment of rent, it's under state law, it's just a 5-day notice. It's a very fast process.
Yeah.
But under the moratorium,
that's what we deal with most often. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I know you guys have seen that. And it's frustrating for you as a service provider, because you have to act quickly when somebody gets that notice to try to figure out how to help your clients. But now under the CARES Act, for those properties alone, at least they get a 30-day notice. So they're getting an extended notice period. Now, there is something vague about the CARES Act that our judge in Oklahoma County, we're preparing for a little argument about this. The judge, we've had discussions with him, the judge who's covering evictions in August for Oklahoma County, that judge believes that the 30-day notice provision only applies for rent that accrued during the period of the federal moratorium. So roughly March to, late July timeframe. So that judge is interpreting the CARES Act to say that if a landlord isn't trying to get that rent, but just says, okay, you're late in August, even though this was a CARES Act property, you're late in August, this is post CARES Act, we can go back to the typical rules that you only get a 5-day notice.
Gotcha.
I don't think every county would agree with that. I don't think every judge would agree with that. And we're certainly going to argue from our client's best interest that no, they still need a 30-day time period. But of course, this CARES Act is something unique, and it's only just now expiring. So we don't have any case law from anywhere else in the nation to go off of.
Right. We're all learning now about this as we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something, so that, I feel like I'm throwing a lot of information out there, and it's a little complicated.
No, it's exactly why we have you here today.
So, I think for most people, they'll see that the 30-day notice, and we are hearing from some clients who are starting to get those 30-day notices, that landlords are starting to start the process on them. But we'll see if once August comes, we'll see if any landlords try the 5-day notice trick just for August rent. At any rate, we're going to be here and ready to jump in and fight for people.
So once I, as a renter, get that notice, what do I do?
Right. First, I would call 211 and call us, and I can type in our application hotline, and we have a website people can use to apply for our services. Right now, especially if you're a renter, and especially if you're a renter who has lost income due to COVID-related reasons, and it can be you personally or somebody else in your household. For instance, the other day at the courthouse, we had a woman who has been behind on rent, but just needed a little bit of help to catch up. And Community Cares Partners has an organization that's offering a lot of people assistance with rental assistance if they've been affected by COVID. And they were there at the courthouse too. She was worried that she wouldn't apply because she hadn't lost any income due to COVID, but her husband's hours had been caught. And then that's why you just need somebody in the household. And it doesn't mean you don't need to have totally lost your job. If you could just prove that your income has been affected, the door opens to a lot of financial assistance. And they're trying to help people as fast as possible, and they have a lot of money to hand out. And it's not just them, of course. It's Homeless Alliance, Salvation Army, CAA, I believe, has some rental assistance too. And typically, just call 211, and they can point you in the right direction and get you in touch with one or any of these organizations. 211 will also get you in touch with us too. So on the one hand, you want to reach out for potential rental assistance as soon as possible. And on the other hand, you want to call us too. Let us evaluate the case. Just because your landlord says you owe a certain amount of money doesn't mean that's always the case, right? There's a lot of times where we can make a legal argument, not just that you don't owe this money, or maybe your landlord's not making repairs. Maybe you have some major issues with the housing in general. Maybe you are, say, if you are on a subsidy or some sort of either a voucher or in subsidized housing, there's other potential issues that we need to explore. We might need to get the housing authority involved. And then maybe, there could be some really big issues, potential fair housing issues and things like that. All these cases are different, and give us a call, let us take a look. And one thing is we're working really closely with all of our community partners, and that's what you guys do at Upward Transitions too. And what's good is all this money's out there for rental assistance, but we work closely with them because we want that money to go as far as possible, to last as long as possible. We don't want to just throw money at problems when maybe those landlords don't necessarily deserve that money or owed that money. And we can find a way to say, no, it's not $2,000. Maybe they just owe you $500 to catch up and settle this issue. And then that won't just help that individual client, but it helps whoever else we can spend that money on down the road.
Well, and that's what I want to make sure that anybody's in this situation is empowered with knowledge, and that's what our case managers try to do, is they try to empower them with knowledge. You have the right to this. You have the right to you know, a healthy place to live. You have a right to this piece of information. Our case managers do an excellent job of walking them through the process. You know, you have a right to this document at this point in the process. And so, you know, we've received some CARES money as well. And so, you know, our goal is always to keep the family in a healthy, stable environment, and to work with the landlords. You know, we're not, and some people are like, you are anti-landlord. We're not anti-landlord. We want to keep the family in a stable situation. We just want that to be a fair situation. And we want them, you know, we don't want them to get taken advantage of just because they don't have the knowledge, the legal knowledge, if that's necessary, or, you know, the piece of paper that they have to have, or whatever. And, you know, sometimes that's when we call you or whatever. So, you know, our case managers are really good at equipping our renters when they're in that situation to access the rights that they have. So hopefully it's a win-win.
Yeah, hopefully. And I would say, and I think your case managers know this, but if we could say one thing about dealing with your landlords for the general public that we want everybody to know is, the simplest thing to know is that written communication is key. Most of your protections under the Landlord Tenant Act and in certain other areas, they don't trigger unless you get given written notice. And we have clients all the time who say, well, I haven't had AC all summer and my landlord isn't doing anything about it. And all they've done is call. And unfortunately, the judge doesn't have any power to help you out if all you've done is call. Like, you can, and a lot of people think this too, you can go, you have a great story, you just need to get in front of the judge to tell your story. But the judge is limited by what the law says. And if you haven't given
now,
written
just
notice,
for my own benefit, do text messages count? Do emails count? What kind of written notification, what level of written notification counts for our renters?
I think that's open to interpretation. And I think there might be somebody in one of our other offices, I heard, had taken something up on appeal to try to settle that issue. But the judge, and this might vary from judge to judge and from county to county, the judges here in Oklahoma County, I do believe, accept text messages as writings. I think email would be even stronger than that. An email feels even more of a writing than a text message. But at least here in Oklahoma County, we know we have at least one of the judges. And if one of the judges rules this way, I think that's a strong sign that the other judges would rule that way too, at least in Oklahoma County. But he does accept text messages as writings. So that's key. But to be totally on the safe side, you know, you'd like to just have a physical paper that you hand to them, make a copy, save a copy for yourself, you know, with a date on it. So you just have a record of what you told your landlord. And just because it's in writing doesn't mean, you know, we're not trying to be antagonistic or start an argument. And you can still be as polite as possible and tell them verbally or in person, but at the same time, hand them something in writing just to protect yourself, just in case you need the protection of the law down the line.
So say I'm just a regular, it's okay. So say I'm just a regular member of society. I'm not a renter. You know, I'm hearing about the next crisis is going to be the eviction crisis. You know, I'm dealing with COVID. I'm a member of the community, and now I'm hearing about the eviction crisis. What can just a regular member of the Oklahoma community do to support those who are about to face this eviction crisis? Obviously, they can, you know, reach out to one of our agencies to learn more. But what kind of, you know, education? Advocacy? What is it?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of that time and money. I mean, for a lot of these issues, unfortunately, and particularly advocacy. Now we're sort of limited professionally, or through our organization, we're not allowed to advocate one way or another for any sort of legislative changes or anything like that. But I will say, you know, for our renters, one, we need resources for attorneys to be able to evaluate all these cases. Right now, our docket numbers are actually lower than they typically are. If you compare last year's docket numbers at this same point in time to this year's docket numbers, right now we're far lower. But
Right.
everybody's anticipating once the federal moratorium comes to an end, they're going to skyrocket to much higher than they normally are. I saw a study today that showed that 42% of all Oklahoma renters are at risk of being evicted. 42%,
Yeah.
that's a massive number.
Yes.
So we're going to need more resources.
Like unfathomable.
Yeah. So we're going to need people to, we're going to need more resources, and we're working on that to make sure we can address everybody, every tenant facing eviction. And then in the end, a lot of these cases, we're not going to have legal defenses for. So we're going to need rental assistance. We're going to need options. Right. And this reminds me of what I was talking about, or what I wanted to mention earlier. When you were talking about safe and habitable housing, sometimes this rental assistance can be used in other ways, and we found creative solutions. When talking about bad landlords, we've had cases where a tenant was facing eviction from a landlord, but their housing was uninhabitable anyway. They'd fallen behind in rent, but they weren't really given a habitable place. They had all these reasons that they don't want to live there, but they had nowhere else to go. So instead of throwing a lot of money at this bad landlord anyway, some other organizations are allowed to shift that money to apply to moving expenses and deposit and first month's rent. And in the end, I've seen cases where it was even cheaper than catching them up on rent at this bad place anyway. It was even cheaper to just help them move. And I think what we're going to see, what people will need also, is moving assistance, just the physical job of moving. If somebody's evicted, worst case scenario, somebody's evicted, they lose their hearing at court that day, the landlord can go apply for a writ of assistance, and the sheriff will put a 48-hour notice on the door. If somebody loses at court in Oklahoma, they only have 48 hours to figure out what they're going to do with all their physical possessions and where they're going to go. And we have seen a lot of people.
Having recently moved, I know how stressful that is to do over a week's time. I can't imagine that the stress of all of that and then that time period of 48 hours.
And imagine somebody being evicted for non-payment of rent. They're not going to have a pile of money to help with all these. You've got to worry about the fees for switching your utilities over. If you're just a single person, you might have to rent a truck, and how are they going to come up with all this? If we are going to face this big upheaval and people are going to be evicted, we're just going to need physical help too, to help to set them up in a new place and physically move their belongings. We've seen a lot of people who've lost personal belongings over the years because they weren't able to get all of their stuff out. My dog's barking in the background.
That's right. In this time of COVID, we just, deal with everyone's, backgrounds, don't we?
Yeah.
So, Greg, is there anything else that you want to add? Anything else you want to share about, the work that you're doing with eviction and homelessness?
I think I don't know. It's an interesting time. We're in a different time. We don't really know what to expect. We just know that we're expecting a lot of numbers. And we are paying close attention to the national news right now. It looks like another big relief package might be coming to help out renters, potentially, maybe to help extend this federal moratorium that's in place. But, for a lot of our people, the federal moratorium doesn't affect them. And we've got a lot of people who've already been affected by COVID who are already getting evicted. It's an exciting time too, because we're working closely with all the other organizations in the area, and we're getting a lot of good results right now. But there's still a lot of, heartbreaking results going on out there too. But I think the general public, I was going to encourage people to pay close attention again to the news to see what comes out, what they agree on, what they get passed in the federal government. And hopefully it'll be something that really impacts people and prevents this from being as bad as it could be.
Yeah, just like you're saying, one really awesome success story. We'll have an amazing success story where we'll help a mom and a kid, stay in their home, but we know that's just the tip of the iceberg, where we're able to pay their rent for a month or two and keep their utilities on and those kind of things, where we'll make that like really amazing intervention, but then, we kind of like turn around and we're like, oh, there's the line, like of people that just because of this crisis just are there needing so much help. And it's longer than it's ever been before.
Yeah, and you just got to take it one case at a time and do what you can do. Yeah.
Well, I'm appreciative for your service at Legal Aid. You guys are super helpful to us when we need it the most with the legal help, and you guys refer to us all the time, and so your partnership is definitely one we value. And so I appreciate you taking the time this morning to kind of dive in a little deeper on what we're going to see with evictions. So thanks again for joining us this morning, and everybody, next Tuesday will be another topic. I hope you found a little bit of hope, even though we were talking about evictions, and we'll learn a bit together again next Tuesday. So have a great day, and find a little hope.